Hello, my name is David Reside, and this is Developing Carbon Stories, a podcast about the project developers creating the most innovative and impactful carbon projects in the world. Each episode, we speak with an entrepreneur from a different part of the carbon ecosystem and talk about their journey so far and how they're continuing the climate fight. On this episode, we're speaking with Greg Murray, CEO and co-founder of Cocoa Networks, a climate tech company based in Kenya that's working to introduce cleaner cooking technologies and ultimately transform people's lives in the world's fastest growing cities. Greg Murray, thanks so much for joining us on our inaugural episode of Developing Carbon Stories, where we have carbon project developers come on and tell their stories behind the carbon credits that we use to achieve our climate ambitions. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, David, for having me.
Now, you've come from an interesting background, started off in finance and accounting in Australia, and you found yourself now in the climate change space in Africa. How did you get to where you are? What led you into the climate change space?
Yeah, I was one of those. I managed to get a scholarship when I was a sort of a kid, working at one of the big accounting shops. KPMG, and I was in this sort of private family business type division, privately held companies, $2 to $50 million revenue. We did all of the audit, accounting, tax advisory, etc. And I was just 18-year-old in a suit, doing university at nights, working one of the grunts. And one of our clients had a film studio. They're immigrants to Australia. I was based in Sydney. And I got a call. I used to do sort of menial work on their family office, basically, as the outsourced accountants, and quite an elderly lady, Jewish origin. The film studio founder had been in Auschwitz, in fact, tattoo and everything, and they built this amazing animation studio. Anyway, she called me up. It's a hubby and wife duo that built this. She called me up one day and said, "Greg, I want you to do some research and build me a financial model." I said, sure. How can I do that? How can I help? And she said, "Look, I want to understand if I can reforest a large area. I can buy some land and plant a forest and use carbon credits to pay for it." And this was in 1997. Kyoto Protocol had just happened. Very forward-thinking lady, and I hadn't heard about any of this because I was an 18-year-old, thinking about drinking beer and working hard and trying to make money, these sorts of things. And so I started reading about it and got pretty interested in the whole intersect between environmental markets, development, sort of technology, and business. And that was the start of a very, very long journey that's been mostly emerging markets in focus. But yeah, it was that moment where I sort of became aware of the possibility that this externality that I was sort of vaguely aware about as a bad thing might really went deep into the rabbit hole of environment, and then the potential way that capitalism as a tool might be used to solve for environment rather than just destroy it. That's basically the origin of it.
Yeah, right. And it's interesting you bring up that concept of conscious capitalism. I read an article that you were interviewed, and you described cocoa as a form of socially conscious capitalism. I guess, seeing as this is carbon focused podcast, I mean, would you put carbon markets under that category as well?
I think that the carbon markets have the potential to drive amazing impact and to create outcomes that wouldn't be possible otherwise at scale, that enable the green industries of the future to be built, to enable conservation and restoration to occur at a scale that would not otherwise be possible. That's the hope. That's the idea, the promise of carbon markets. Perhaps it hasn't always been implemented in that manner. Carbon 1.0, and now this sort of latest interest globally in the markets. But I think that remains if you go to the sort of the philosopher architects of the Kyoto Protocol, I think that was in their mind. Certainly, that was what inspired me early on about the potential to use these markets to create these sort of outcomes, particularly in emerging markets and places that are bearing the brunt of climate change, but didn't actually historically cause it. That's the hope. I believe that we're living that hope. You know, we're real, we're genuine, we're making it happen. But yeah, I can't say that's the case for the overall markets.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it seems like cocoa uses carbon credits more as a tool to achieve a broader outcome. So, I mean, cocoa is an interesting case. I mean, it's an extensive operation. You know, in-house it has manufacturing, distribution, infrastructure, community engagement, as well as carbon credits. I guess it's such a highly integrated organization. I mean, was this always the goal when you co-founded Cocoa, or was it born more out of necessity?
Why are developing countries called developing countries? Because a lot of the actual underlying systems and markets haven't been developed. It'd be nice if you had an ecosystem of subcontractors that you could just focus on doing one thing and sub out the rest. MBA theory from the West is that's you should focus on just doing that. But as you get into less developed markets, you find that you need to actually build not just a niche piece of the puzzle. You can't stand on the shoulders of giants. You've got to build the entirety of the puzzle. And so for us, we're building an entirely new industry, which is around actually solving the dirty cooking fuel crisis, right? Through replacing the dirty cooking fuel industry, which is in Africa alone, it's $30 billion that's spent on deforestation-based charcoal. It's an industry that engages millions of people, right, and is massively destructive. In order to solve that energy industry, that dirty fuel industry, you need to replace the fuel with a clean fuel at some scale. There hasn't been a new mass market consumer fuel introduced in Africa for over 100 years, right? To do it, you need to be combining customized technology, customized infrastructure, customized policy, institutional capital, and a whole lot of hard work. It's not easy to solve this problem. We had 500 staff before we had revenue 5 years into our existence. It's a sort of deep tech type bet that you don't get usually permission to build in this part of the world. It's a sort of first principles R&D that goes on in a place like London or Sydney or San Francisco, but ultimately we said let's go really let's build our R&D facilities in East Africa and fundamentally see what's required and have a very open scope, not sort of rule anything out. And that means we write code, but we also write legislation. We design hardware and we manufacture it in-house in our own facilities. Would it be nice to contract manufacture? Sure, but when you're building a new industry, you've got to provide a take or pay contract to the contract manufacturer, and when the demand's uncertain because it's a new industry, you can't really do that, right? So we've found that we've had to sort of just build each of the building blocks. Thankfully, by partnering with the liquid fuels infrastructure owners, we don't have to build that. We don't have to put the capex into building that. The arteries for liquid fuels distribution do exist on the continent, and we're able to partner with those infrastructure owners and make that happen at scale, and that makes the solution low cost as well. But yeah, it is we have 1,200 staff today. It was 3 years ago. It was 100 staff. 3 years from now, it'll be something like 5,000 to 6,000 staff. So we're in this sort of very, very significant growth curve right now, and it's complex, but it's working, and it's actually delivering the outcomes on the ground, which is just a whole lot of block and tackle hard work turning up every day by our commercial and operating teams, our software teams, our product teams, our manufacturing teams, our policy teams. That's what's required to actually solve the charcoal cooking fuel crisis.
Mm-hmm. And so this charcoal cooking fuel crisis, the dirty fuel crisis in Africa, particularly at the moment, I suppose in Asia as well in some areas. You've come to that area from, as you would put it, the putting it in the business case for someone's tree planting operation in 1997. I'd be interested to see or to hear about how you sort of heard about this significant challenge, and then I guess for cocoa it's also an opportunity. How you sort of came about to be in this particular niche of climate change development.
About 15 years ago, I set up with a business partner, another one of the cocoa co-founders. I set up a clean technology venture investment group, which is the founding investor in cocoa, and that was reflecting on about 2 years of traveling around in sort of the 2003 to 2005 timeframe, traveling around Latin America, Asia, Africa, and really going deep on this intersection between environment, business, technology, and development. Yeah, and looking at interesting businesses that we might invest into. It was during that time in Southern and Eastern Africa that I stumbled over charcoal. It's a huge industry. It's all informal. Unlike deforestation in say the Amazon is very much a sort of a soybean and cattle phenomenon, right? And we're all familiar with that. We all understand the big corporates who's and our own appetite for beef and soybeans that's driving that sort of industrialized deforestation by large companies. In Indonesia it might be palm oil, right? And so we get commodity supply chain driven deforestation, but as folks in Australia, UK, Europe, America, that haven't spent too much time on the ground in sub-Saharan Africa, it's a little bit of invisible of a market, this charcoal market, because it's informal. There's no big charcoal player that's doing industrialized charcoal. It's literally tens of millions of people chipping away at the edges every single day in order to feed the demand of the cities. It's urban demand. It's not rural demand. It's urban demand, and this is a short-term income earning activity by taking out the trees, carbonizing the wood, and having these the charcoal on the bikes, on the trucks going into the cities, and then it's informally retailed. But during that time back then, I was saying, geez, this is because you travel around in some of these rural areas, and there's no agricultural commodities coming out. The only thing that's coming out is bags of charcoal, and the scale of it. It's okay. Where's it going? What's the price of this energy commodity? And so literally just started measuring it. Hiring a local guy to go and actually understand what things cost. What is the retail price? Hiring scales, right? Undertaking to the household energy service. Try to understand what is this market, and then running back of the envelope, calculations to try and figure out, okay, what is this on a per household basis? And it's nuts what people are paying for this basic, for putting energy, heat into food, and then you blow that out, and then you look at the impacts of it. It's 600,000 deaths per year on the continent. It's 1 billion tons of carbon emissions. It's 2 million hectares annually of deforestation just for charcoal. It's nuts, and it's insane. In fact, there was a but it's not new. It's just that there hasn't been the investment in technology that's designed for the price points that is required, that you need to hit to deal with the poverty levels, right? That's the problem. There was a charcoal cooking fuel price crisis in the city of London in the late 1400s.
Really?
Yeah. So charcoal was what everybody used, not mineral coal, but charcoal from the forest, and the whole of England was denuded of trees. And the only reason that the only reason that was solved was the discovery of mineral coal in the ground. This is pre-industrial revolution, pre-steam engines. People switched from, there was an energy transition from above ground, coal from the forest to below ground mineral coal, right? And then there was another energy transition that happened when oil was discovered, Rockefellers and so on in America, right? And everyone called it the new light back then, but you look from a volumes perspective, kerosene was actually used more for cooking. And so there was this switch from mineral coal to kerosene for cooking. And so, you've seen these switches over time as countries rather modernize. and that's going on in different stages at different rates in Africa at the moment. But fundamentally, you've got this sort of hard reality that that there's only three fuels that have any sort of market share in the it's a $47 billion market is the cooking energy market in urban sub-Saharan Africa. That's the World Bank's numbers. 30 billion of that's charcoal, so it's the vast majority. And then there's a little bit of action at the rich end of the spectrum, which is fossil LPG, right? And that might be about 5 billion. And then there's a little bit of action at the bottom end, being kerosene. And that's largely in places that have subsidized the hell out of kerosene, like in Nigeria, or places where the deforestation, the forests have run away to the extent that the London price crisis of the late 1400s has now hit that particular city, and people have been priced out of charcoal and are now going into a lower cost alternative. And if you think about the three forms of energy, right? There's a gas, there's a solid, there's a liquid, right? It's all portable energy in these markets, right? It's portable gas. There's no pipes going into your home. The electricity is generally not stable enough to enable electric cooking, and the appliance efficiency equation doesn't really work if you're getting really cheap appliances for electric, right? And so the cost of cooking with electricity is quite high. So you end up with a portable gas, a portable solid, and a portable liquid. The fuel that wins from a straight cost perspective is the portable liquid. And our simple thesis some years ago, really a decade ago now, was what about a more sensible liquid than kerosene, right? What about a liquid that's renewable, that can be produced sustainably at scale, that's already a large market? What about a liquid that can leverage the existing arteries for liquid fuel distribution? And what about a liquid that creates an emissions reduction outcome that enables us to leverage carbon to fundamentally lower the cost of the solution to consumers, right? They were the set of theses. What is it going to take to do that? And we did a proof of concept. And then based on that proof of concept, we said, okay, we see there's clearly demand, let's go and build, and spent, what ended up being 5 years building the hardware, the software, the legislation, building our factories, before we finally turned on the network operator. That's our parlance. So we have a network operator in the city of Nairobi, the whole metro area of Nairobi. We turned on that network, similar to the way you turn on a mobile network, in Q4 2019, 5 years into Coco's founding, and commenced earning revenue by retailing super clean liquid bioethanol at scale. And now, 2.5 years later, we're at about 22% of all Nairobi homes cook with us every day, and we're scaling vertically. We're rolling out across other cities. We're investing in new countries as well. But it's been that sort of journey. But essentially, long time. It's now 17 years ago that I stumbled across the charcoal markets in Southern and Eastern Africa, and just got OCD focused on how stupid it is that in this day and age that this is the way that we humans are still cooking like it was in the late 1400s. There's got to be a more sensible way to put energy into food that can solve for the affordability challenge. That was basically the genesis.
Yeah, okay, that's fascinating. I mean, so would you put down the lack of solutions before Coco, the lack of effective solutions in this space, just because of the lack of awareness, particularly in more developed countries, with the concept of people still cooking food with charcoal? Obviously, it seems quite like a very foreign concept to someone growing up in Sydney or in Melbourne, like we did.
Well, I think it's an awareness issue too, but it's more than that. When we set up Coco, I think during that year there was $30 million worth of venture capital that went into the whole continent of Africa. Yeah, I think it was something like $5 billion last year. And so that's only like 8 years or something, right? But if you're doing deep tech, you talk to the VCs of the world, and there's a clear divide between 90% of them don't touch hardware because it's bloody hard. Yeah, it's really hard. You've got to build your own factories and stuff. It's really hard. And so, if you then say, okay, look at those that are doing emerging market venture capital, right, that don't like hardware, and it's more like 99%. Yeah, and so I do think that there's a lot of importing or decosting solutions from the West into emerging markets that happens. There's very little. I think there's inadequate first principles invention, R&D, and building of solution that is targeted for the needs of consumers in this part of the world. And so we took a very first principles, let's understand what the customer really wants and then build that for them, rather than let's take something that's worked in in the West, and then try and find a way to make it cheaper or less safe, and decost it, and subsidize it. And fossil LPG is a good example. It's only really scaled in middle income nations like India, Brazil, Indonesia because of massive and sustained government subsidy, right? And that's how they've solved the affordability challenge in wealthier nations. Whereas governments in this part of the world do not have the money to be able to, even if they wanted to subsidize fossil gas, they do not have the money to do it, right? And so it's been out of reach, that tool. And yet clearly there's an affordability challenge for sort of modern energy. And so we said, look, rather than decost the thing and make it crappy, pardon my French, but make it sort of low cost, and not really durable, and breaks in 6 months, that's one way to solve the affordability challenge. Or rather than rush into subprime consumer lending in order to spread the which is what some of the solar guys have tried, rather than do those things. The third answer, and I think the right answer, is to harness global carbon markets and use them to share the value of carbon with end consumers at scale, right? So we've got a funnel of money from carbon markets that's going into the hands of Kenyan households at scale that enables us to solve this problem, even in households that are earning $50 to $100 a month in household income. They are our customers. They're buying fuel from us every day. That's been fundamentally enabled by carbon, and wouldn't be possible without it.
Yeah. So could you talk a bit more, perhaps, about the way that carbon markets can have an influence on the pricing and the availability of the equipment that you can provide to households? I can't remember the figures, but I remember seeing them seem to be a pretty significant help for households that might not otherwise be able to afford this sort of equipment.
When you're thinking about affordability, there's if you're a low-income household in say Nairobi, there's 3 dimensions to it. There's the cost of the appliance, there's the cost of the fuel, and then there's the bundle size in which the fuel is made available. And so they're the 3 sort of dimensions that you've got to get right. You can't choose 2 out of 3. You need to hit all 3, right? Low-cost fuel that is delivered in small bundle sizes, with an appliance that's low cost as well. So pretty significant challenge when you're talking about a really high quality appliance and fuel that has a price that fluctuates. It's a challenge that the fossil LPG guys have had is, how do you make the fuel available in small bundle sizes? Because the minimum refill bundle, the 6 kg cylinders that they have, is about $15 in Nairobi today. And so if you're a telco, telcos in this market, the dominant one is called Safaricom. It's a Vodafone subsidiary, and basically their most popular bundle size for selling airtime or data bundles is 20 cents, right? So if they had a minimum bundle size of $15, their revenue would fall off a cliff because it would become unaffordable. Why? Because nobody's got salaries. These nice neat payments at the end of the month. People are earning their income daily. They're self-employed, right? Or they're earning the incomes of wage laboring on a daily basis. And so their expenditure in these tools would be basically daily or weekly in smaller bundle sizes. And so how do we do it? So the form factor, how we distribute the fuel, is through this network of high-tech fuel ATMs. And so we have now about 1,300 of these high-tech fuel ATMs inside. Think of them as sort of unbranded 7-Eleven type corner stores, right? Like if you go into a 7-Eleven in New York or London, you'll see a cash ATM, right? It's the same sort of model. So we drop this machine in the corner of the store. It's about the size of a tall, thin Coke fridge, 65 centimeters wide, 2 meters tall, right? And we punch a hole in the wall that enables our fleet of smart micro tankers to refill the fuel ATMs, right? So there's a fuel line that goes in, a vapor recovery line that goes out. And so that's how we achieve the proximity. So this dense network of these fuel ATMs is within a short walk of everybody's front door, right? And that's the whole point. If you're selling Coca-Cola, beer, cigarettes, rice, sugar, maize meal, right? In the mass market economies, in emerging markets, you need to be within a short, it's a convenience foot-based retail play, right? And so how do you get this flammable liquid in small bundle size within a short walk of everybody's front door? That's the fundamental last mile problem that we're solving. It's pretty easy to get a flammable liquid to a petrol station, but getting it through the last mile, that's what took us 5 years to crack. And it required building this whole new suite of last mile fuel distribution and end use technologies, right, in order to make it work. We've had to write a ton of software around, how it's a wicked logistics challenge. These ATMs have 350 liters capacity, and we have trucks that visit them every day, right? And you can't have bigger tanks because you've got a little tiny space in these shops, right? The ATMs are a significant part of the shop. So some of them are holes in the wall type shops, right? And so, and then fuel is a morning and evening lines business. We have 70% of our fuel is sold after 6 p.m., which is logical because everyone's coming back from work, they're getting their fuel, they're going and cooking, right? And so there's just a lot of you simply cannot solve this fuel availability, fuel uptime, we call it, in terms of the ensuring that none of the ATMs stock out. You can't solve that without technology. We have these 15 sensors inside each fuel ATM that are setting a real-time data heartbeat to our network operations center. Think of a telco knob that's monitoring its base stations, its towers. Same idea, right? But our baby towers are these fuel ATMs, so that we can see, ethanol vapor content. We can see, if someone's trying to shake it. We can see if it's on mains electricity, if it's on we have 2-day battery backup as well, right? And of course we can see real-time inventory levels. We can display the behavior change messaging around cooking tips and fuel conservation tips, as the fuel's being dispensed on the actual screens. So there's a ton of this stuff that's controlled centrally. That's why we're called Cocoa Networks. It's this dense network of agent stores, small business partners of ours that have this machinery that we own and that we service like a renewable fuel utility that ensures that this fuel is always available, that our brand doesn't suffer from stockouts, etc. That's basically the play. And carbon fundamentally plays such a massive role in ensuring that the appliance is affordable, ensuring that as a really concrete example right now, Putin's invasion of Ukraine, that's driven up fuel prices everywhere. You're seeing a lot of noise in rich countries and poor countries around how do you deal with the consumer impact of spiking fuel prices, whether it's British gas prices or whether it's Kenyan kerosene prices. Right now the government of Kenya has a 50-cent per litre subsidy to cushion the consumers from the impact of Putin's war in Ukraine, right? And right now, cocoa has a carbon discount to cushion consumers, right, from the impact of Putin's war in Ukraine. Right? So this smoothing function around this bundled carbon and fuel business that we have, this bundled platform that we have, enables us to delight customers, to serve them every day, to make them happy, right, and to fundamentally use the fuel on a daily basis, even as commodity markets go haywire in the real economy with regards to fuel, even as food prices have, I think the flour price here, the wheat flour price here has gone up 80% in the last 6 months. I mean, people are doing it really tough. Carbon fundamentally helps us lower the cost of living for our customers. That's how important it is, and for us, increases in the price of carbon that we achieve directly translate into lowering the cost of basic energy services for consumers. It's this direct and causal relationship that's quite unique.
It's a really interesting way to look at it. Now, I've heard you mention before, one of the key points of difference of cocoa is, particularly in the African market, is you have really good customer service. And so do you see the carbon financing that you receive as a way to really support that pillar of your business?
Yeah, I mean, so what do we mean by customer service? We have a call center, we have a field-based customer service team, we have an agent network management team, right? So think of if you're familiar with how mobile network operators work in emerging markets, it's quite similar. So the commercial and operational footprint, except of course we're not moving a digital commodity, we're moving a physical flammable liquid safely into the extremities, right? And ensuring that so you have to do that extremely carefully with SOPs that we've written, with standards. We've actually written the national standards in Kenya under which we're regulated, and that process itself took 2 years, right? It's nuts, the sort of regulatory work we have to do to operate, but it's right. It's the right way to sort of build an industry sustainably, safely, and so customer service, yeah, it's about when you think about what moves a new solution, how do you get a technology to go from sort of early adopters to really, like we've done, sort of crack across the chasm into the mass market of adoption. You really need to get that word of mouth engine rolling on the ground. In Nairobi today, in mass market Nairobi today, we are a top 5 consumer brand, right? A top 5 consumer brand. You knock on anybody's front door of any of the low-income houses where the bottom 70% of incomes live, knock on anybody's door, whether they're a customer of ours or not, and they'll know us, they'll love us, they'll have a very good opinion of us, right? So that's possible because if there's been a challenge, for example, if they've left the they've left the appliance outside and it's rained, and then the mineral fiber sponge that absorbs the ethanol, right? That's one thing that happens, right? They forgot to bring it inside. Now that's a $1 consumable fix, and we do it within our repairs and maintenance center in our network operations center. All they've got to do is call us up and say, look, something's gone wrong. We say, don't worry, we'll sort it out. They can drop it off at their agent location. We do the reverse logistics. We take it back. We fix it. And what you've done then is, a customer that's been, potentially quite frustrated now becomes your biggest advocate. And guess what? You get their neighbor, you get their sister, you get their mum. You've got 3 new customers out of one relatively low cost but sensible active brand building and customer service. That's what we mean. That's a critical part of how. Of why we're growing vertically is this heavy attention to focusing on the customer, solving their problems, and definitely that definitely carbon as a material sort of revenue source of the business that enables those sort of investments to be made. Definitely, that's I don't think it would be possible without it.
Yeah, right. I mean, it just strikes me as amazing how much infrastructure and work had to be put in before it could be, as you mentioned, the switch could be switched and this service be provided. And now that it is, you've expanded into 3 cities. Is that right? You're in Nairobi, Mombasa, and Kisumu at the moment.
Yeah, and then our first rural network in a place called Siaya County out in Western Kenya, about an hour and a half outside of Kisumu. We are doing the first principles R&D work to learn through doing about tackling this solution beyond the big cities as well. And we think that there's a real opportunity to do that. And so far so good. Siaya is about it's about a week and a half old, and we've already got 1,000 new households in a place that is rural, but it's also got no trees left because of charcoal. It's got 0.42% forest cover as a result of charcoal deforestation right now. And so people actually don't, it's like sort of Haiti. People sort of have this idea that that the rural areas, folks will just go and collect wood. But if you've been to Haiti, there's no wood, there's no trees. And so the cost of charcoal in Haiti is actually higher in the non-urban areas because you've got to smuggle it in via the boats from Dominican Republic into Port-au-Prince and then truck it up country. And so you've got additional logistics cost. And so, we learn a lot through doing as we go into these new geographies. But yeah, we do think that there's a, like we've committed to do in Rwanda, which is a more densely populated country, we do think there is a sort of a universal access network that is out there that we can solve this problem properly, not just for the urban citizens.
Of course, the logistical challenges of delivering this service in a rural setting versus an urban setting would be, to me, it seems like it'd be a much more challenging scenario. How are you sort of addressing the issue of, I guess, population density? Might be an issue, being able to deliver services viably in that context.
You hit the nail on the head. It's so an evolution of our field distribution hardware is going to be part of it. We've built this ATM form factor for dense urban environments with a 5,000 litre micro tanker that delivers every day, right? Well, you don't need that in a village. In fact, that's probably silly because you don't have the space constraints. What I think it looks like, just to paint a picture, and we're not there yet, but in rural, but if you've ever seen those pictures of the early days of the rollout of the of the petrol industry in America in like the 1920s and stuff, you see this sort of general store in a village,
Oh,
you know,
sure.
and
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
general store, and it's got like an underground tank and a little pump like that, and people would
Yeah.
bring
Yeah.
their, bring their buckets, their jerry cans to get their
Yeah.
kerosene to go back and light their lamps. That's sort of what it looks like. I think it's probably something like instead of a 350 liter above ground ATM, it's probably more like a 3,000 liter below ground tank, right? Properly set up, just like in front of a general store in a village. And there's a solution that we've built and tested. I'm not sure we've publicly announced it, but as a sneak peek, it's working. It's fun. We're calling it Cocoa Everywhere, but it's basically it's a solution that enables a small entrepreneur to have a dozen full canisters in their shop, and customers bring their empty canister, and then they use an app with a handheld device that we give the entrepreneur, and it basically swaps the empty for the full, right? Whilst because our customers, they all have an account, right? We have visibility on all of our customers, just like a telco. And there's an NFC chip in the neck of the customer that's actually coded to the customer. So when you dock it in the fuel ATM, it says, "Hi, David, please enter your PIN," checks the cloud, says, "Okay, you've got 300 shillings worth of Cocoa credit. You can buy 30 cents or 50 cents. So that's how it works at the moment in the form factor. We've been able to take that same idea of maintaining, we set the fuel retail price through the platform, through the wallet, right? But maintaining that same low fuel retail price, but enabling us to extend the reach of our fuel ATMs and run this sort of canister swapping approach. And so, yeah, you can see, I can see that sort of working, where you'd have a hub and spoke approach, where you've got a general store with an underground tank, and then you've got these other entrepreneurs coming in, on motorbikes, for example, with 15 canisters, and they're able to go and then basically service their village. And so the guys that are doing the transport are really the guys that are doing that as a business opportunity. That's I think where it's going. But yeah, give us another year before we've got that operating at scale. It's working now at sort of a 100 shop scale, but to really sort of systematize that and push that out over the whole network, and to enable us to sort of triple our fuel retail points of presence without necessarily tripling our ATM network capex. That's what we're trying to solve for.
I see. And I guess, this makes me think of, you've mentioned you have aspirations of going international beyond Kenya. It seems like something that would work quite well with that aspiration. Do you have any updates on moving beyond the borders?
Sure. In January, we signed an investment agreement with the government of Rwanda, who really wants to solve this problem. Rwanda is quite crowded in terms of the density, even in rural. They call it the land of 1,000 hills. And so, as you take trees out of the hillsides, the hillsides degrade, and you're actually reducing your arable land, right? And so deforestation everywhere is a food security problem, right? Charcoal deforestation drives food security, but particularly in a very hilly place. And so this is front and center for the Rwandan government. They're genuine about trying to solve this problem. The challenge is that historically, governments basically have only had one tool in the policy toolkit to solve this problem. Governments understand, they're on the ground, they understand that to beat dirty fuel, you have to beat like charcoal, you have to switch the fuel. And the only modern fuel that's been available is fossil LPG. But fossil LPG, the policy prescription is massive amounts of subsidy, right? And that's what's worked in Indonesia, Brazil, and India. If you don't have the balance sheet to be able to fund that massive amounts of subsidy, well, charcoal reigns supreme, right? And so that's what they're grappling with. And so we basically approached the government of Rwanda in conjunction with our joint venture partner in Rwanda. It's a group called Dolberg Climate Ventures, and basically said, look what we're doing here in Nairobi. We've actually cracked it. It's taken us a long time. It's scaling vertically. We'd like to come and do this in Rwanda, but our OCD focus is on lowering the prices to consumers of cookers and fuel and so on. And so the challenge, there are tollgate taxes on pretty much everything in emerging markets. And by tollgate taxes, I mean import tariffs, I mean excise duties, I mean VAT, right? So these are tollgate taxes that serve to drive up the cost of goods and services. And of course, charcoal, which operates in the informal economy, doesn't have any of these tollgate taxes. And so whether intended or not, the baseline fiscal policy stance of most African nations is to favor charcoal, right? That's the fact, versus a new thing that's coming in that hasn't got, specific exemptions from those tollgate taxes. And so we proposed, we said, look, we're a sustainable infrastructure investor and developer. right? We build the sustainable infrastructure, we solve this problem. We propose to come in and make a $25 million investment into Rwanda to build a countrywide network, employ 501 citizens, and fundamentally solve this problem at some scale. And we do not want any of your money. We don't need any subsidy. So unlike the fossil LPG guys, they're basically asking for government money to scale this solution. We're not doing that, but we're saying, please, in return, we'd ask that you commit to 10-year removal of VAT, input duties, excise taxes on all the fuel and all the hardware, the consumer hardware, the network hardware, and commit to not erecting sort of export tariffs on carbon credits, and very open about how carbon works, right? And basically saying, look, instead of government money, we have a B2B solution we're selling to corporates in Western or in wealthier markets, and we use that money to solve the affordability challenge, right? And so this is a mechanism. This is by design as a founding thesis. It's working now at scale. What do you say? And they looked at it 10 Ways to Sunday and took it all the way up to the cabinet and to the president and formally approved. So we signed that with the Rwandan Development Board, the Ministry of Infrastructure, the Ministry of Finance in January this year, and are now putting the pieces together. So yeah, it will be the next country we go live in next year. It's a big process. It won't take us the same number of years as it did in Nairobi, but it's not a small undertaking to build a network. There's a dozen different work streams, a couple of hundred people that we have to hire, train, bring on board. Software integrations, infrastructure preparation, quite a lot of implementation of the government agreement in terms of the national standards and a range of other things that have to be written, fast-tracked. That's basically the process that we're taking. And in fact, we're engaged with similar government negotiations around agreements in half a dozen other countries. That's basically the play. And so if we can remove those toll gate taxes, and we've committed in the agreement to pass them 100% to consumers in the form of lower prices, and then obviously use carbon to lower prices even further, right? And if we can get those agreements with governments, then that determines our order of travel, because there are 60 low-income tropical forest nations that need these networks. There are 60 of them. Yeah, and so we have to be able to figure out how we can basically serve the maximum number of customers in the minimum amount of time, right? Energy is the least free market sector of them all. There's always taxes and subsidies based on what's in favor at any one time, and so this is for sort of forward-leaning governments that are genuine about actually solving the problem rather than just talking about it. We're open for business. We're happy to come and invest.
It's amazing. I'm conscious of time. I think we've sort of reached the end, but I mean, I have about 1,000 more questions which I'd love to ask, but we'll have to leave it there. I really appreciate you taking the time and answering these questions and just sharing with us your insights into the opportunities and the challenges and Coco's and your own journey. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, David. Cheers.